Okay, we should be good. Okay,
Okay.
well, welcome everyone. Welcome to, I guess it's week number 3 now for PPA 500. I'm sure some of your colleagues will be coming in along the way, but to be respectful of everyone's time, I thought we'd go ahead and get started since it is 4 p.m. As I told you last week, we are very fortunate this week to have Kelly Janicek with us from the University Library. And I know she has a very busy schedule, so I'm always very grateful to her that she's willing to find time to come and speak to our PPA 500 classes. And Kelly always hears me say this, but I always tell all my courses before she starts a presentation that this will probably be one of the most useful sessions that you will have throughout your entire time in the MPA program, because Kelly is here today to talk to you about doing research in the discipline of public administration, as well as how you use APA formatting to cite your sources. So the information you're getting from Kelly today will be information that you'll be able to use throughout all of your future courses in the program. So Kelly will have the first half of the class tonight, and she'll do her presentation. Then whenever she is done and all the questions have been answered, we'll take a brief break. And then the second half of class tonight, then I will talk to you about accountability and ethics in the public sector and give you the information you need in order to do a good job on your second Canvas essay, which is coming due then next Monday. So I will shut up for now and I'll turn it over to Kelly. And Kelly, thank you again for being here, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good evening, all. I'm going to go ahead. I've got a PowerPoint to keep me on track because I'm a librarian. We wander, whatever. Do not be shy if I don't see your hand raised to shout out to me to get me to answer questions. I'm a librarian. That's what we do. We answer questions. And truthfully, a question is good because it may be something you just didn't know about. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to start with here. Let's see if I can get it to work. Yep. There. Screen sharing. Am I screen sharing the right stuff? Yep. Okay. Sometimes it doesn't work as well as I think it's going to. I'm going to go over some basics that I'm never sure if everybody knows about when you come to the library, use databases or use Google or Bing or any of the search engines. And I want to make sure you understand some of that stuff. So I'm going to start here. So let me make sure So I'm going to talk about some basic research steps that you may know, you may automatically do, but I want you to start thinking about them more in a holistic way, because sometimes they'll help you focus and be more efficient in your research. I'm going to talk about some little tricks to the computer system, which make it a whole lot easier. One thing I talk about is information types for this class. And I think because depending on where you are and what you're doing, if you know what kind of information how it might usually be published or presented, it might help you be more efficient in any research you might do. Then we're going to try to start discovering information. It's no longer you have to know the subject heading and find it. There's a whole set of tools out there that you just throw some words out there and see what comes back at you. Well, we'll talk about that. That's a little bit of a problem. Like Dr. Paul said, I'll do some APA citations. Then we're going to do a little research project to make sure you understand what I talked about, because I want to make sure you get what I'm talking about, because sometimes there's a disconnect between what I talk about and then actually doing it and making sure you understand. Okay. So come on, go. So I always say when you're doing research on a particular topic, which is different than if you're doing research if you're doing something for a thesis, say, or something like that. It's different ways of starting this. But you need to think about your topic and have you defined it well enough. I have people who say, well, I have to write a 5-page paper and I want to do it on abortion. I'm thinking, yeah, with 1 billion hits, I don't know how small we can get for 5 pages. So sometimes you need to evaluate your topic a little bit. And I'm going to give you some little tricks on how to make sure you understand your topic enough. I know you have a textbook. Sometimes that helps define your topic, but I've got other things in the library that might help you define it a little better, to understand it a little better, so you can make sure you've got a workable size in doing your research. Then we're going to talk about all the disciplines. You guys are in public policy. Did you know that's a subdiscipline of political science? And may include a little sociology and maybe a little accounting and maybe a little economics and maybe a management. I could think of a whole bunch of disciplines that I've seen when working with public policy that comes across. So sometimes think about what discipline your topic may be more focused on. It might help you with your research. I'm also going to show you a database that helps you maybe think about which discipline might be a better place to look for your topic. Even though it's listed third, its number one thing is to develop your vocabulary. The computer thinks it's smart as it discovers things, but the reality is it's not as smart as it thinks it is. So when you go in and you type in, a topic here, workload, or say outsourcing of work. Do you mean outsourcing? It could be called, oh, now I've forgotten all the words it could be. I've seen many, many words that have come in the English language that define that topic as it changes over time. So the computer doesn't always understand the words you type in may not be the subject, and it may be actually another word. So I'm going to talk about how you can develop your vocabulary in little ways to make sure you've got it all covered with the databases that we have. Then we're going to talk about these computer tips. I know a lot of you by default understand that you use and. So the first word and the second word and the third word are automatically anded together, and they all have to be there. Now they have to be there, but is the relationship real or not? Using things like public administration may get you a lot of words on the public sector, and it may talk about administering it, but it's not really public administration as we know it. So you need to realize that and is not always the best way to define stuff, but it gets topics linked together. Not is very helpful when you've got a topic that's very popular, but you don't want to talk about that one. So a few years ago, the European Union was dealing with Greece and all its economic issues. And that's all you could find was stuff being written about Greece. Well, that isn't what we wanted. So we say EU or, I'm getting to or next, European Union, and not Greece or Greek, and monetary policy. That not will take out those words that you did not want. The computer databases allow you to do that. Google does not work real well with not, just so you know. The other thing Google doesn't do is filters or refinements, and our databases refine quite nicely. You can do by languages, you can do by locations, you can do by people, by subject words, which are more refined way of finding what the article's about. And I'll talk about that just in a minute. So I talked about EU or European Union, Greece or Greek. So if you've got a lot of words that are synonyms, you can use the or to put them all in there so the computer will find all the variations that you might need. My absolute favorite trick is phrase searching, putting something in quotations. This is not for one word, but it's for like two or more words. So public administration should be phrase search with the quotes around public and after administration. My best example going into subject terms and phrase searching is looking for environmental policy. There is a whale of a lot in environmental policy. If you Google search it, it doesn't even count them. The last one I had was at 10 billion hits. And that was several years ago. So I put quote environmental policy unquote and got it down to about 5 billion hits. Then I went into the database and did environmental policy in quotes and got almost 1 million hits. But then I limited it to the subject word environmental policy. I can't demonstrate to today because the way the database updates itself. But at that point, the third reference was about a previous governor talking about climate change and the laws that needed to be written to help us create a good climate. Well, think about that. That's about environmental policy. Laws or policy was about the environment, climate change, but it didn't even use the concept environmental policy because our databases are different. Unlike Google, where you're word searching, somebody has looked at those articles and determined that article is about that. They may not use those words, but it's about that. That's why using a subject term refinement quite often gets you better things because it's always about that and maybe doesn't use the terms that you thought would work. I'm going to stop right here and see if anybody has any questions about those basic concepts. No? Yes? Woohoo! Okay. I'll continue to talk. So let me go back to sharing. Let's talk about the different kind of documents that you might need. Probably the most common things that you'll use is articles. But there's different kinds of articles. They do different things. They're good for trending information, research on it, the real nitty-gritty research, getting the data, the statistics, all that stuff. They sometimes have advice. They may be commentary on a topic. They're quite often your first choice for research. They also come in various types. On the bottom, you'll see all the pension boosts for millions, what I call the rags. You see them at the grocery stores you leave. They quite often have people like Taylor Swift on the front cover and things like that. They are collected by libraries, but they're not indexed anywhere because they talk about popular culture and really shouldn't be used for your discipline. The next one up I want to talk about is newspapers. They are usually the most current information out there. Actually, events that have happened very, very recently. They now come as news online, which is updated literally by the minute. It happens versus newspapers that come out daily or weekly, depending on the newspaper. We have lots of indexes to newspapers, and you need to know they exist if you want something very contemporary. The other one that comes out are trade or professional publications, and you see PA Times on my screen, or the Journal of the AWWA, American Waterworks Association. Those are publications put out by the organization. So PA is put it by a public administration, American Public Administration Association, and the Journal of the AWWA is by the American Waterworks Association. These are publications for their members. And these articles aren't scholarly, although quite often association may have a scholarly publication, but they're more of how we did this, how we succeeded at this, how we failed at this. Good source of information if you're doing budgeting planning or dealing with hiring, those kind of things that may make a difference on how to go about it more so than the why, wherefore, and how many you're going to hire and what the percentage of diversity and all that stuff is, the real research-oriented stuff. Finally, probably a lot of work that you do in this program, you might need scholarly peer-reviewed, scholarly or peer-reviewed, depending on the database. You can limit these, and these are real research-oriented. So you see the Public Administration Abstracts Journal, which is by the Association of American Public Administration Association, but it is a research-oriented publication. This will have data sets. It will have charts, graphs. It will have a methodology. It will have a bibliography. It will have how they came to this outcome, this kind of data search. So those are probably the ones that you talk about, and probably for you guys, the trade professionals or the research-oriented ones would probably be the most common. Then there are books or reports. They're good, more historical, background, trends, research. They are not quick. Just like scholarly articles are slower than the newspapers. Trade publications are a little faster than scholarly articles. Books are on after all these guys. They take a little while to gather the data, produce it, and put it out there. Meanwhile, reports also take a little bit more, but you find a lot more of those kind of things out on the internet. This is where we talk about who, what, when, where, why publishes. When you're out there on the internet, you need to watch your editorial review. You need to know who the author is, what the bias is of the company organization producing that book or report. There are the biggest publisher in this country is still the United States government. And all information has a bias, but what's being published on the web these days has a lot more because everybody wants to convince you to believe that the way they believe. So you have to be aware of who the authorship is, who the organization is, that kind of thing. The one on the bottom is the Sage Handbook of Public Administration. That is a good encyclopedia handbook that if you don't know what your topic is, that's a good place to start. It kind of gives you a 3-5 page analysis of the topic, broad strokes so you understand where it's going, what it's about, subsets of it. It helps you learn your vocabulary. It has a list in the bibliography of some references of what they consider key to that topic. So it's a place to start gathering information. So an encyclopedia is a really great way to understand your topic a little better, to understand vocabulary and the layout of the discipline or topic that you're covering. The next one I'm going to talk about is statistics. Yes, there are statistics out there. The government is the biggest statistic person in the world. Our US government. Not a whole lot of other governments do as well as we do. The data needs to be interpreted by you, but it's also a way to back up what you've read about. They say, well, 10 out of 12 Americans are na, 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 na. And like, how did they get that 10 out of 12? Let's go back and find the statistics that do that. Time series for long-term study. I'm going to poll you guys, and I hope you'll put it in the chat. Does anybody know what the longest running time series of statistics are in the United States? Nobody has a guess? Oh, I know you guys know this. It happens every 10 years. They had it in 2020. They'll have it again in 2030.
The census.
You've got it. And I'm talking about the census of population. But just to give you a highlight, there are like 10 different censuses taken by the US government. And there is one in government about local, state, taxation purposes, funding purposes, that kind of stuff. So they are a good way to get some more data if you don't know. The two on this, the top one is done by the state of California, and the bottom one is done by the United States Department of Education. That gives you an idea. You will find data in research-oriented articles, and they should tell you where the data came from. If they were funded by any federal grants, that data should be in the public domain and should be accessible to you. That's part of the rules now of getting any federal grant money for any research that gathers data. So we're out there trying to get you access to all the data that exists in the world. Okay. So I've talked about different types of information. I've talked about some background, how to do it. So let's go ahead and discover what's out there. So let me give you a caveat here. The library purchases databases from vendors. We currently have 333 or 335. I can't remember from day to day. How do you know which ones you want? And these are not like Google search or a Bing search. Both of those products are really a marketing tool for the 21st century, and it's self-proclaimed what's going to be there to find. Unlike the databases that we purchase, they take the journals that fit the discipline and cover every single article from issue 1, page 1 to current, whatever. So if the journal changes names, it keeps up with it. If it dies, we have them in, we know the index of it. The other advantage of a lot of these databases, they're full text. So you'll have the article right there. It's the way we've pretty much gone and the way research now works. How do you know which of the 335 databases to work with? We've got what we call research guides. And let me show this. If you're not familiar with the library page, I'm trying to show. No, that's wrong. That was this thing I just showed you. Hold on. Can you see the library page? No, you can't. Oh, I hate this guy. Sometimes he does not. There, new share. There. Now you can see the library page. This is the university library page. I know many of you have seen it before if you've ever been here. The research guides I'm talking about are right here under this big one search box to the left of the database, to the right of the databases. So you have two ways to go in. You can go in by databases and limit them by topic, and public policy is one of them. Or you can do the research guide, which will probably give you more information. If you're using Canvas in the course, which I believe you are, in Canvas, there is a library tools tab on the left side. You don't have to log into the library. If you click on that link, it'll allow you into the databases because it sends you in through the secure server and it automatically lets you into the databases. So you might use this research guide that I'm showing you. Share. Which is the csulb.libguides.com. Note that it's not a .edu. We outsource this, and so no longer can you rely on web addresses to tell you where the information's from. /public_administration. So this one gives you a lot of information, and at this point, I think I'm going to take you through a little bit of it to show you little things that might help. So the one thing is, I'm going to show you the actual page. So research guides, because I didn't have it up, and I just type in public. There's public policy administration. Okay. The type page has a lot of APA stuff on it, and I'm going to talk about that near the end, but if you need to come back, here it is. How to read an article, how to write an annotated bibliography. If you have access problems, here's some of the things you need to know. And one of the things I talk about here is what is citation tracking. Depending on what you're doing, say you're doing something in the policy sites class or the program evaluation class, citation tracking might help you, and here's something to give you a little idea. There I am. I don't look like that today, but that's what I look like normally. You can make a Zoom meeting with me or email me with questions. Most of you use the Get Sources tab. Okay. Here are the encyclopedias I talked about. They're all online. They link out. You can get to them, find out what you need to find out to understand. Okay. There's some statistical and data sets. I also keep that database, or not that database, but that research guide, and it gets very minutia. There's a couple thousand references on it. Here are the databases that I'm talking about that might help you find information. If you forget, the little I will help you remember what it's better for, shall we say, okay? By default, public administration abstracts will probably be the most useful to most of you. realizing that it does just public administration journals internationally. So public administration in Britain is very different than public administration in Singapore, which is very different than public administration in the United States. So just be aware that it does cover other places in the world. But logged in, I should be able to go, and it goes. Yes, thank you. They're now doing all that stuff. This one is based on an index. It's not a very in-depth thing. It's very, I fought for years. The publisher had it in this little book, and I'm like, you got to make it online. You got to make it. We finally got it, thank heavens, but now we have to play with it the way they put it together. So I'm just going to use my typical environmental policy. I'm not very original in my topics. Okay. I can do that. I can do my and another topic, say California. I can, or I have no similar topics for this one. I can take things out. So maybe I don't want, let's see what happens. This will be interesting. I still have 779. How many if I had just environmental policy in this database? 837. Okay. So here on the left are my refine. So I can do it by date. I can do just peer-reviewed articles or the scholarly stuff. I can do reviews about the topic. I can do trade publications. It also allow, well, that's about all they've got. I can do specifically those articles of the 651 that truly were indexed on the topic environmental policy, or maybe I want environmental law. Maybe I want something else. Maybe I need to think my topic through a little bit. Maybe I only want pollution or environmental economics or climate change. By doing some of that, it refines my topic and it's not as big as it was. I've got languages to refine by. I can do by publication, but it's probably not your best thing. I'm going to go back and narrow it down to the 651. Truly talk about it. I want peer-reviewed. And truthfully, I only want stuff from the last decade. I'm down to 45. Wow. Okay. Now I start to look at titles and I think, I don't want European Union. I'm told the Front Lines Environmental Regulation, capacity. It also gives me the subject headings they chose for this. So just go ahead. Question?
Wait.
Okay. How many of you guys realize public administration used to be called civil service? That's another word change that makes a difference when you're looking for things. So I just want you to know. Say I like this one, bringing back exploring concept of space, time, and place for environmental policy. This sounds very interesting to me. Here's what the article's about. Is it what I really want? Gives me other things. Oh, by chance, it's full text over here on the left. Yay. I now have that 16-page article. That's another thing about those articles. The research ones are very long. But the other thing, it gives me a chance to email it to myself. And one of the things I recommend if you're going to email it to yourself is to go over here and make sure you download the citation, APA 7. That will help you start your bibliography. And I'm going to talk about what you have to change, but it gives you a lot of the information that you need. Okay. Let's see. What about the first in the Biden administration? Looks good. I'm kind of interested in it. It's the Journal of Federalism. Oh, it's not full text. What do I need to do? How many of you have been in Google and it says $50 for this article, please? We will get that article for you. Just get it at CSULB. We have a service that allows you to get an article usually within 24 hours. Sometimes it takes a little bit longer. I went for looking for a pamphlet. 2 years they looked for it and they finally got it. 2 years, but I got it. So it comes out and it tells me where it is, full text. We do have it in-house. It's not very fast. Okay. So here's the article. Here's my PDF. Here's how to cite it. And the reason why I talk about citing it is sometimes these vendors put in the citation that leads you to our, puts it on the other side of our security wall. And that's the other thing I'm going to talk about, okay? But you're going to want the DOI, which is this last piece right here, as you see me highlighting it, okay? Questions, comments? Does this even make sense? Okay. What am I sharing? Yep. Okay. Let me go back and gather what I need. I don't want that anymore, that anymore, that anymore. So now you see the databases again. I want to show you, talk about these other three that are here. If you're doing public policy, they kind of look the same, but they're not. If you're doing something on current issues, they are not the same. Politics database is something we got a couple years ago. It's a combination of 3 different databases in one. It's truly for political science, which public policy is a subset. But it also contains 2 products that deal with policy only type issues. Policy Index and Public PAIS, Public Affairs Information Service. So it gets down to the nitty gritty. You can find local documents, government documents in politics database because of PAIS. It's very good. There was another day when I was using it for a geography class. It had really great stuff for them. I'm always amazed. I'm real pleased that we got it. Replaced something that I was not happy with. It was not finding what we needed, but this works really good. The other one I talk about is ABI Inform Complete. It actually is the American Business Index, but before we had public administration abstracts, it was the only database for public administrators to use. Okay. Oh, I don't care. Because it allows me to look up classification codes. And I want to get articles that are either the nonprofit or the public sector, say, add it to my search. Now it takes out a lot of the corporate sector, which it has a lot of. This is an old tried and true database from the 70s. So if I do, and I'm going to limit it to California this time because it's so big. I can change it here if I want to, but I like the database to tell me what all's available. And then I got 360 here. I got scholarly, I got newspapers, I got trades, I got dates. Let's go here. I got down to 74. I can do specific subjects. I can do companies. I can do locations. I can get California specifically. I can get languages. I probably want to make sure, I want to show you the trades that exist. This one still has 9. So like the American Planning Association from planning. The Investor Dealer's Digest, which is for investors. Telecommunication reports. You start to see some of these trades. So investors are worried about being socially responsible. ABA, Gulf Drilling, Canadians American, FCC. All these articles are full text in here, and some of them do include PDFs. So you need to watch for that. You always have to click on it. It is on default. What else this database does on the right-hand side, the ProQuest products. People who looked at this particular article, City Industry Squareosh over improving whatever, other people looked at these articles at the same time. And they're relationship articles now. So instead of doing subjects, I'm now looking at what other people have looked at to see if there might be something there that I want. Trades are probably not my best way to do it. I'm going to take trades off and limit to peer reviewed. Colorado. Explaining national performance approaches, whatever. So not only does it have full text, it has all the 89 references at the bottom of the article. How many times this article has been cited in other databases owned by ProQuest, including the Web of Science, which isn't owned by ProQuest, but their parent company is. Documents, 6,000 documents share references. Then over here on the left, it kind of gives me some more relationships. So now you're finding a lot more, as I call, discovering information, because the databases have that capability of doing that kind of reality. Does this make sense of how to manipulate the databases in a more efficient way? Yes, no? I see a question. I got a thumbs up. Does this help? And the only thing I got to say, the only refinement you got in Google is by date. And it's like 1 year, 3 years, 5 years. And that's it. You don't get all these other options. Linkages, relationships, reference citing back and forth, and all that kind of stuff. Okay. Let me go back to my PowerPoint and see where we're at, because we got our sources now. I talked about them there. So let me ask you real quick, see if you can drop it in the chat. The best type of article to use for research is gossip, news, peer-reviewed, trade professional. You heard me, peer-reviewed. Yep. Thank you. What would be your second most helpful article if you're doing something out there in the workforce? Yep, professional, trade. That's where I'm going with that one. Okay, can I ask you this? Web pages and reports, the web needs editorial oversight to confirm credibility source of information. I would validate it via asking a person, author credentials, Wikipedia. Yep, author credentials. And you can always look up, whether it be an organization, an association, a think tank, a person, you can always look up to see who they are. And do they write a lot in this area, or are they just kind of fluffing with you? Wikipedia has come a long way, and I would say it isn't a bad minor source to use if you're struggling to find out who the association is or what they believe, but it's still got a little problems with it. And let me tell you this story, why peer-reviewed or scholarly articles are so important. These are like the A++ articles. And publishers who have been questioned how that person who published that research article, scholarly article, came to that conclusion because they have duplicated and cannot get the same results. The publishers in their concern would go back to the original author and say, okay, give us your data, show how you came to the results. And because of tenure policies, whatever, the person will admit, well, it's a fake results. The publisher says, uh-oh, that's unacceptable for us. We're pulling your article from our publication. Take it further. If anybody else in their publications has cited that article, they will pull those articles too, being bad research. So now you see that they're finding more and more articles that were fake. And there are a lot more articles being pulled in these days because of the research done. Let me go back to the web page. And I talked a little bit about the research books. Let me close you off. The encyclopedias. But let me talk about a couple other things that are on this page because they might help you too. I pulled PPA topics. I had gone out to the web to find the think tank, the association, the organization that's done. So based on what you guys ask me, people have been asking about budgeting taxes. So I pulled some major sources there. City and county information, information about nonprofits, information about transportation. As you ask me things, I will create this PPA topics to give you some web sources to start from. These are associations that published in paper years ago, or I vetted them and they meet the criteria to meet what I think is important, okay, for research-oriented things. And they should tell you what they kind of have included. If you're in the policy class, which I know several of you will be taking, I want to mention there are different sources that might help you. There's also sites that talk about various policies, and we've got some books. We've also got directories of mostly done by librarians that if you have an organization and you want to know what their bias is or what policies they're tracking, you can look them up in these various things to get an idea of who they are and where they're going with their thinking. So it kind of gives you credibility to your authors out there on the web. If you're doing, there's a class that I taught a couple of years ago. I'm not sure if you're still getting it. Research instruments, data sets, things that you might need for doing research at a high level. Here's some books on the left. I put this page together. If you're taking the class on program evaluation, it's actually one time when Google actually works for you. And I talk about what you need to think about putting in there and do a Google search. We also have OneSearch, which is our version of Google. Most of the stuff in there has been vetted of a more scholarly incline than more just stuff that's out there. And then we have some more research background stuff that might help. Definitely the politics database helps with program evaluation kind of stuff. I have some research methods videos if you need to get some better understanding of using the concepts and or not phrase searching, better understanding of how to work with vocabulary, those kind of things. I'm hoping those will help you. I'm going to stop because I just need to know, does anybody have any questions? You're making this too easy for me, and I'm not that good at explaining things. I'm a librarian. I talk in my lingo, my library lingo. Confuse you. No? Okay. You guys are moving me right along really fast tonight. Okay. So let's talk about the basics of APA, the 7th edition. Yes, you can buy it on the internet. Do not buy the 6th edition. You want the 7th edition. And if you remember on the research guide, on the first page in the first box, there are 2 links to the APA pseudo manual. Because of COVID and all the manuals that got locked in libraries, APA came out with some cheat sheets that are really nice and they kind of help. So it shows you how to cite a blog, how to cite Wikipedia, how to cite a person, however you find your information, how to cite it in your bibliographies. And I will not lie to you, you need to create bibliographies to show where you got your information from. Otherwise, it's considered plagiarism and it's a no-no in America. I showed you about the research guide, that there's a tab for citing manual guides. There are managing softwares out there for bibliographies. The library has access to EndNote. You can find that in the database list. Mendeley and Zotero are softwares that you can attach for free to your web browser, and you can manage and gather information that way. We have a library that quite often teaches a class in Zotero, so if you watch on the library workshop guide, it will show you when those might be offered. But basically what you have are things that look like this. The first one is an article. So you have the name, comma, first initial, middle initial, and next author. APA went from 27 to 35 authors. You can put 35 authors in there now. You guys will never have 35 authors. But if you're in the health sciences, you sure will, because everybody who does a statistical analysis gets to have their name on the article. So usually it's 1, 2, 3. I've seen as many as 5 in your discipline, but not very often. Then you put the year or the date. You put the title of the article. Notice that not all the words are capitalized. The first word, proper nouns are capitalized. Everything needs to be lowercase. And that's what we're going to talk about when you download the references in the databases. You need to manipulate them. And this is one of the areas that shows. The name of the periodical, which is upper lowercase in italics, then volume, comma, volume in italics, and then you put your issue number in parentheses. Then you put first page dash last page. You remember when I mentioned that that article 16 pages? It gave you first page and last page, but ABI Inform is notorious for saying 16 pages and gives you the first page, but not the last page. They've been around for a long time, and that wasn't common when they first started their database to do that for references. So you need to quite often figure out what the last page is. APA created DOIs, digital object identifiers, and I pointed them out to you a little bit. They created it about 2017. When you see a DOI, you know that is a scholarly peer-reviewed article. They're the only ones, and those that are academic press books are giving DOIs. So your professor looking through your bibliography can tell how many scholarly articles you've got. They are an alphanumeric thing, and I'm going to show you some examples of what look good and what don't look good. If you're doing a book, or you can do a chapter out of a book, that's the next citation. You need to put your title of your chapter in, and then you got to add your editors, the title of the book, and the edition, the pages, and the publisher, and you no longer have to put the city and state on references. Let me tell you, that makes a big difference because publishers move from city to city all the time. It's very confusing. If you have a report from the internet, your organization name, the year, the title of the report, the agency in charge of the report, and then the link. Those are kind of the broad strokes. Like I said, that guide on the first page of the PPA guide gives you more options to look at. So when you download it from the database, you will see things like this. But you'll also say that look like retrieved from, or they say DOI colon, or they've got this, just so you know, the csulb.idb.oclc.org is our firewall, for lack of a better word, our firewall vendor. Keep everybody from stealing all the information that's out there that we purchase, because why should they get it for free? We purchased it for you guys. You paid for it. So you quite often might have to change your DOIs. And I don't know why you have to dx.doi.org when you can do doi.org. Less typing, less error, in my mind. Okay. So this is an article from Public Finance Review. It is an older article, 2001. DOIs only came out in 2017, 2015, 2017. But publishers of peer-reviewed journals went back and put DOIs on all their old articles. So the peer-reviewed journals have DOIs on all their articles back to issue 1, page 1, however long ago it was. This was taken out of Public Administration Abstracts. I don't have it paper, so I collect on the Get It. It sends me there to Sage, who's a major public. And I looked at it and I asked for the citation because that's where it had the DOI from 2001. They added it. So now I have the DOI of the scholarly article to put in my bibliography. You will not get it out of the database because it's too old. Okay, so if an article's scholarly and doesn't have a DOI, you need to go look it up and see if you can't get it from the actual vendor. Does that make sense? If it's a newer article, this is what it'll look like. Newer articles tend to have the DOIs in the citation, so when you download it, you will get them. This article is from 2011. Oh, it's a little older, 2007 maybe. I don't know. They added it. Oh, it's Blackwell. I know they added it. So I've got some good, bad, and indifferent. I need help. You're going to chat with me. In the first article from Public Administration Abstracts, this is what I downloaded. What is wrong with it? What would I have to correct? Do you need a clue? Remember when I talked about capitalization? So federal should be capitalized. Strategies induced resistance, states, participation, all should be lowercase. ACA Health Exchanges is a proper name, so it is the way it is. If an article does not come with a DOI, do you use the link where you found it? If it was from a database, you don't have to. If it's something you found out on the web, yes. Does that make sense? Okay. I download this next one from ABI Inform, so what's wrong with it? I know I talked about this one a lot.
Is it the retrieve from?
Yep. Because it's from a database, we just talked about it, from a database, I do not have to include the retrieve from and that unusable link because it's only good for you because you logged in and that's what it picked up. So if it says online, I put a period after the online, and if the faculty member needs to confirm with me, we could show you how to find it. Not a problem. Okay. So yes, ABI, you'll have a lot of them that you'll just be a period after the title, if that's all you've got. And it has no pages because it says it's online. Onlines don't tend to put pages on things. So it's kind of a bloggy kind of employment benefit advisor. It's kind of a bloggy kind of thing that they index. Okay, what about the last one from the politics database? What's wrong with that one?
Too much capitalization.
You got it. So capital word should be what? All? And that's it. Yep, everything else should be lowercase. They should be capital A, small ll. Look at that. Does that make a bit more sense about APA? Yeah, because you can download your citations, but you've got to edit them, people. You have no choice. ABA being the worst offender, although the politics database, I was shocked to see that one, but it was probably, that might have been a PIS publication. That's an index that's been around since 1911. So just the way they do it. Okay. Oops, sure. So that's how you contact me, although the LibGuide gives you that information. The other thing I want to talk about, and to make sure you're aware of, do you see this Ask a Librarian down here? It will pop up when you're in a LibGuide or when you've gotten past your first page of your searching of something and say OneSearch or a database or whatever. That is a service that we have. A librarian is on the other side of that, 365 days a year, 24 hours a day. So we know computers gives us data. Most students are doing their research between the midnight and 2 a.m. Let's be real. Students worldwide are mainly doing their research between midnight and 2 a.m. Amazingly, a majority. The library's not open. You can't get in. But that chat service will help you. They'll help you with your vocabulary, recommend the best databases to use. It's kind of there aren't that many in the world. It's kind of universal. They may even help you or refer you to how to find in the APA manual to cite something. They can help. I know when I do 11 a.m. on Monday mornings, all my people are from Britain. You do the math, it's 1 a.m. in Britain at that time. That's when they're doing their research, and I know this. So those are the questions I get, is all the British people. Most of the time, they do language. So if you ask for a Spanish person or whatever, Spanish-speaking person, you can do that. But go ahead and type in your question, and somebody will pick it up. And it's helpful. If they find out it's something so unique to us, they cannot help you, we will get a message back in the next business day. We will pick it up and get in contact with you to make sure you're all taken care of. So don't say that there's never a librarian around, because we are. I want to try to break you guys up and send you off to an escape room and see if you can go in, do a couple things for about not quite a half an hour, and see if you understand what I talked about. So in the chat, I am going to put a Google form doc. And I'm going to break you up into, let me see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. I'll do about 3, 4 people a room. There's about 5 subjects. So if you're in room 1, you take the top subject, which I think is water. The second one, can't remember them all. I need to go look. So for you're in room 1, you're going to do water. Group 2 will do budget. Group 3 will do parks. Group 4 will do waste. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The last group will do downsizing. Does that make sense? Okay, I'm going to break you up and send you off. If somebody can share their screen, maybe, or you talk with each other and work your way through. You don't need to be 100% accurate, but I want to make sure you're looking at, you've got a thesis or a topic. What vocabulary? What databases make sense? Do those words work, or are there other subject works that work better that you didn't know about? Okay. See if you can cite it in APA. those are the things I do. I will drop in and out. So let me do. So I created 3 rooms. And let me recreate. Let me do one more. It's a little big. Okay, so there's about 4. There's a couple 4s and a couple 3s. Okay. You will be assigned, and I think if you look, it'll tell you which room you're going into. 1, 2, 3, 4. So it gives you water, budget, parks, waste.
Okay, well, welcome back, everyone. The recording from what Kelly covered with you in the first part of class tonight obviously will be up on our Canvas site no later than tomorrow morning. And I'll keep it there, just like all the rest of our recordings throughout the duration of our class together. So if anytime you want to go back, review any of that information that Kelly provided, that recording will be there for you. What I thought we would do in the last part of class here tonight is to talk about accountability and ethics in the public service. And as we had discussed a couple times before, ethics is a topic that will run through this entire MPA program. And the approach that we use in our program is we sprinkle ethics into all of our core courses rather than having an additional 3-unit core course in ethics. And that saves you a little bit of money and saves you a little bit of time in terms of progressing through your program. So this is your first exposure to ethics and accountability, but certainly will not be your last. So our purpose tonight is just to kind of introduce the idea of accountability and ethics in the public sector, talk a bit about why adhering to ethics and enforcing ethics can be difficult in the public sector, and sometimes even more difficult in the public sector than in the private sector. Talk a bit about how the ethical standards really do vary between the two sectors and why those ethical standards tend to vary. Go through the ASPA code of conduct, those 8 different principles that you'll be using as the basis for your Canvas essay number 2. So that's our purpose over the next hour, and I think we should be able to get through all the information, hopefully have a little bit of time to spare. So I think we all have a pretty good idea of what we mean when we say accountability, holding someone accountable for something. When we're talking about accountability, we are inherently talking about the relationship between people and things. So the relationship between administrators and public taxpayer money, or the relationship between administrators and the citizens they serve, or the relationship between administrators and their fellow members of their organization. But it's always relationships that we are looking at when we're talking about accountability. And holding administrators accountable for their actions is at the very foundation, the very heart of a bureaucracy, because it's imperative in a bureaucracy that when you have bureaucrats and you have administrators who are not directly elected by the people, that are appointed based upon their merit, based upon their qualifications, the people, the public, really have difficulty in holding those administrators accountable. So instead, what you have to do is you have to have that conduit through which the public can hold administrators accountable, and that conduit is oftentimes elected officials. The problem with that is elected officials are oftentimes adverse to trying to hold administrators accountable. Because whenever we talk about holding someone accountable for their actions, it always has this very negative connotation. Because whenever you hold someone accountable, it always has that negative association to it. You're finding a problem, you're discovering a problem with the way in which someone is behaving. And elected officials oftentimes don't want to be involved in those problems because obviously being involved in those problems can hurt their reelection prospects. In order to get reelected, elected officials like to claim credit for good things, but they don't want to be held accountable for negative things. And so sometimes they want to keep their distance, elected officials do, from holding administrators accountable. And so sometimes that chain of accountability kind of breaks down with those elected officials. And again, those elected officials are elected by the people, so therefore they are the ones that are directly accountable to the people. That's why they're the conduit between people and appointed administrators. However, even though that chain of command, that chain of accountability kind of breaks down at times, it's still very important for us to have accountability standards and then maintain this balance between holding people accountable, holding administrators accountable for their actions, and providing them with the flexibility in order to be creative and innovative in doing their jobs. You want administrators to not be afraid of getting in trouble for every single decision that they make. You want them to feel that they are free to try new things and to be creative and be innovative. And so you really have to balance holding people accountable to ethical standards while still freeing them up to be effective and be innovative administrators of public funds and the public trust. When you have accountability standards and ethical standards that are seen as too strict, and they really box them into a corner, box administrators into a corner, it will inhibit those administrators from taking bold action. And it also may make it even more difficult to attract the best and the brightest into the public service. That if someone's in the private sector, if they're considering going into the public service and they're a very well qualified employee who certainly could contribute to the accomplishment of the organization's goals, that person may be a little reluctant to make that leap into the public sector if that person is going to be really tied, have their hands tied because of a lot of accountability measures and a lot of control measures. So you really want to try and find that balance between holding people accountable at the same time freeing them up in order to be innovative and effective. So, what approaches have we taken to accountability and ethics in the public service over our history? And so, I think there have been three main approaches to holding people accountable in the public service. Now, if you think back into the 1800s, in the 1800s, you had people getting their job in government not based upon what they knew, but rather getting their jobs based upon who they knew. So this was always referred to as the era of spoils, the era of patronage. And when we get to the management of human resources, I will walk you through the development of employment at the federal level from the late 1700s to our current point in time. But in the 1800s, we were really very much within this era of spoils or era of patronage. So political parties were doling out government jobs to their supporters, to people who rounded up votes in order to get these parties and their elected officials into office. In the 1800s, most of our major cities were being run by these political machines. And you're probably familiar with there were political machines running New York City, running Boston, running New York, running Chicago. Most of our major cities in the 1800s were controlled by these political machines, these political parties that basically ran the entire apparatus of the bureaucracy in those cities. In the city of New York, probably the most famous political machine was one known as Tammany Hall. And the Tammany Hall political machine controlled every single aspect, pretty much, of New York City government, just about every single aspect of the bureaucracy within New York City. They would decide who got hired, they would decide what positions they had, they doled out these jobs to people who supported the political party and helped them get elected. There's a very interesting book that was really a set of memoir that was written by someone who worked in this Tammany Hall political machine, and it was someone by the name of George Washington Plunkett. And the memoir is called Plunkett of Tammany Hall. And George Washington Plunkett, in his book Plunkett of Tammany Hall, talks about some of the things that he and his colleagues did while they worked in Tammany Hall. And one of the really interesting passages in that book is where Plunkett talks about what he calls the difference between honest graft and dishonest graft. Now, the word graft today we associate with corruption, and we use it kind of interchangeably with the word corruption. So basically, what Plunkett was telling us is he was telling us there's one category of corruption that he considered to be honest corruption, and then there's another category of corruption that he considered to be dishonest corruption. Now, today, we would think about all corruption, all graft as being dishonest, that there really is no category of honest corruption for us today in the public sector. But for Plunkett, while he was working in Tammany Hall, an example of what he considered to be honest graft or honest corruption was the following. He says, if I am working in City Hall, and as a result of my job, I come across information that the city is going to buy this plot of land to use for a city park. So based on that information, I, as an employee, go out there and I purchase that land at a very reduced cost because other people outside of City Hall don't know that this plot of land is going to be used for a city park. So I get it for a really cheap price. And then I turn around and I sell it back to the city at a very big profit margin. So the city can then use it as part of the city park. That he refers to as being honest graft, honest corruption. As Plunkett would refer to it, he used to say, I seen my opportunities and I took them. Now, that's kind of the approach that we had in the 1800s, whereby administration and politics were completely immersed with each other. And you really couldn't pull administration out of politics or vice versa. Then in 1887, after the passage of what was called the Pendleton Act in 1883, and the beginning of what we call the era of merit, whereby instead of hiring people because of the political party that they support, we begin to hire people based upon their merit, based upon their qualifications. So we start giving people examinations and testing their knowledge and their skills. And then the people who perform the best on those examinations then get hired into these positions. That all started in 1883 with what was called the Pendleton Act. 4 years later, in 1887, Woodrow Wilson writes his very famous article, The Study of Administration. And Woodrow Wilson, in that article, presents to us the need for a separate study of public administration. And what Wilson says in his article is that if we can pull politics out of administration, we can then better study what he called the business of government. We could make administration more efficient and more effective if we didn't have to worry about politics. And that's what was referred to as the politics administration dichotomy. In the politics administration dichotomy, on the political side, elected officials make the laws and the policies. Then on the administrative side, administrators, bureaucrats then carry out and execute those laws and those policies. But it's a separation between politics and administration. Now, the idea of being able to separate politics and administration is important for a variety of reasons. As we will see as we move into our next couple of weeks of the course, it really laid the framework for thinking about public administration as a separate academic discipline. And that's one very significant aspect of Wilson's argument. The second important part of Wilson's argument is by presenting this politics administration dichotomy and separating out politics from administration, it better clarifies the lines for ethics for administrators. We now have this kind of bright line distinction between what is ethical and what is not ethical for an administrator to do. So if an administrator is executing policy, they are implementing these policies and programs, they are playing in the administrative side, that is ethical. That is what they are supposed to do. They're supposed to be carrying out and executing these policies. However, if an administrator starts playing politics and starts dabbling in the political pool on the political side of the equation, that's then unethical. They should not be playing politics. They should be benign, objective administrators of these programs and policies. The politics should then be left to the elected officials. So when you draw this bright line distinction between politics and administration, it kind of makes it a little bit easier for us to identify and define what is ethical behavior versus what is unethical behavior. And that approach to accountability is kind of what's known as the legal boundaries approach to accountability. Administrators administer, politicians engage in politics, and kind of the never the two shall meet. So it was a very clear way to identify what is ethical and what is unethical behavior. The problem that we ran into, as John Gause talks about, is that there is very much of a blurring of the lines between politics and administration. And by the 1930s, it became very clear to us that you can't just say administrators administer and elected officials do the policies and pass the policies. That there's a very much of a blurring of the lines. And very quickly, as of the 1930s, we see a lot of scholars dismissing Wilson's politics administration dichotomy, essentially saying there is not that bright line distinction between politics and administration, which then makes it much more difficult for us to identify what is ethical and what is unethical, because there could be some roles that administrators legitimately need to play on the political side of the equation. And there can be some roles that elected officials legitimately need to play on the administrative side of the equation. So it becomes much more difficult as of the 1930s and 40s for us to really parcel out what's ethical and what is unethical. Where we kind of are today in terms of our approach to accountability is much more of a contextual type of an approach. After the New Deal, we get into the mid 1940s and into the late 1940s, we realize that the legal and the political approaches really are not cutting it anymore. They are really not as relevant as they used to be. We no longer have this top-down hierarchical chain of command throughout the bureaucracy, nor do we have single professional norms that we can hold our administrators accountable for. Instead, each agency will develop its own organizational culture. And that unique organizational culture is how we will need to define what is considered to be ethical versus unethical behavior. We saw the development of these codes of ethics and codes of conduct in all of our agencies at the federal, state, as well as local level, where each agency starts to develop its own expectations and its own norms for what it considers to be acceptable ethical types of behavior. So today, in terms of our approach to accountability, it is much more of a contextual approach, recognizing the unique cultures in each one of our public organizations. So you can no longer just have a one-size-fits-all approach to defining what is considered ethical versus what is considered unethical. Now, obviously, it does not mean that we don't have a series of pieces of legislation that spell out for us what administrators can and cannot do. We have the Hatch Act as a good example of that. We have the Whistleblowers Protection Act in 1989. So we do have legislation that will spell out what's considered ethical and unethical conduct. But in order to interpret that legislation, we have to always keep in mind the unique culture within each one of our organizations. So that makes it a little bit more difficult for us today to hold people accountable for their actions in the public sector. But when we try to hold people accountable, the natural question that begs is hold them accountable for what? What type of a relationship are we looking at between people and what? What are we holding them accountable for? One way in which we hold administrators accountable is through fiscal accountability. This is by far the most common, the most widespread accountability measure. In fiscal accountability, we are concerned with whether agency officials are spending money on the programs that they are charged with managing and only spending money on those programs. We are looking at how these administrators are spending precious taxpayer money. So whenever programs are created by Congress or created by a state legislature, There will be parameters of how the money needs to be spent on those programs, and administrators must operate within those legal parameters in how they are spending that money. So here we're looking at trying to avoid the misspending of funds, spending funds outside of their appropriated purposes. So holding administrators accountable from a fiscal perspective is oftentimes what we usually think of when we think of accountability in the public sector. But there are other things we can hold administrators accountable for as well. A second approach is what's called process accountability. In process accountability, we are concerned with how agencies and administrators are performing their tasks. So we are basically looking at how administrators and how organizations are implementing these laws and these policies that have been given to them by elected officials. So this really looks at program and policy implementation. The third approach to accountability looks at the outcomes of those policies and those programs. It's called program accountability. So in program accountability, we are concerned with whether a public program achieves its purposes as defined by law. So how effective is this organization or are these administrators in accomplishing the goals of this public program or this public policy? So whereas fiscal accountability looks at how money is being spent, process accountability looks at the process of implementing policies and programs, and then program accountability looks at the outcomes. Kind of that so what question of, well, how is this benefiting the recipients, the beneficiaries of these programs? And are we accomplishing the goals and objectives that were established for us by legislative bodies, whether it be Congress or a state legislature? So to kind of muddy the waters a little bit more, there are different elements of accountability, different things that we are holding people accountable for. So how do we best hold people accountable in the public sector? I think the solution to holding people accountable is to find this balance between external forces such as pieces of legislation like the Hatch Act, like the Whistleblowers Protection Act, finding a balance between these pieces of legislation and the internal character and the internal ethical standards of administrators. So we've got all these laws and all these regulations that are being placed upon administrators externally, coming in from an external source for these administrators and these agencies. But then you also have to have well-trained administrators who really do believe in public service, who really are trying to act ethically. So you have to balance the external control with the internal characteristics and training of your administrators. One of the problems with enforcing accountability is when you are looking at an organization from the outside, you oftentimes can't see everything that's going on within that organization. The people who know best what is going on within the organization are those employees who work within that organization. So in order to maintain this balance, we need to empower those employees within the organization to be willing to point out any types of ethical issues that they come into contact with within the organization. Those people who are willing to point out these ethical violations in their organizations, that's what you refer to as the voice of the organization. They are voicing these objections and voicing these ethical problems that are going on within the organization. These people who are voicing these problems, they're what we refer to obviously as whistleblowers. So we need to provide a safe space. We need to provide a situation whereby these whistleblowers can blow the whistle on ethical violations in their agencies without the fear of reprisal, without the fear of being demoted or losing perks of their job, or actually even losing their job, the job itself. So we need to provide those protections to whistleblowers. As I mentioned before, in 1989, we had this very important piece of legislation called the Whistleblowers Protection Act. And in the Whistleblowers Protection Act, we established processes by which the federal government can make sure that whistleblowers are not being subject to reprisal. If a whistleblower feels that they are being subject to reprisal, they can take their claim to what's called the Merit Systems Protection Board, or the MSPB. And we'll talk more about the Merit Systems Protection Board when we get to the management of human resources in a few weeks. But the Merit System Protection Board is where you would go to blow the whistle. And then the Office of Special Counsel, known as the OSC, is then responsible for going out there and investigating these claims that are being raised by these whistleblowers. Obviously, if you don't protect your whistleblowers, no one is going to feel comfortable coming forward with claims against what their organization is doing. So that Whistleblowers Protection Act was a very important piece of legislation to protect these whistleblowers, because who knows what's best going on within the organization than those whistleblowers. If you don't protect those whistleblowers and you don't allow them to be the voice of ethics in the organization, those people are simply going to just leave. They're going to leave the organization because they disagree with what's going on and they feel that they're not protected enough to raise those concerns to the MSPB or the OSC. So they'll just leave the organization. Then you end up losing all those ethical people within an organization. And then that organization obviously is doomed from an accountability type of perspective. So that balance is very important, balancing those external laws and regulations with the internal character and the internal training of individual employees within that organization. So you really got to balance the external with the internal focus. And that's especially true in the public sector, because I think we can make a pretty compelling argument that since we are dealing with public taxpayer money and public resources, and since we are working in organizations that are governmental in nature, and they are part of this social contract with the public, as we had talked about in the previous week, last week, because of that, the ethical standards and ethical adherence should be higher in the public sector. So much so that there is this shock of ethical upgrade sometimes when people go from the private sector into the public sector. And they are surprised with all of the limitations on their actions. They're surprised with all the audit types of requirements of them that they never had when they were over in a private sector corporation. So when you think about this higher level of ethics in the public sector, that higher level of ethics in the public sector really has a lot to do with the unique values of public administration, the unique values of public service as compared to the private sector. So if you're a private sector corporation, what's your primary concern? What are you trying to achieve first and foremost as a private corporation? What are you trying to do? And if you don't do this, you won't be in business for very long. So what do you try and do as a private corporation? Profit. Exactly. Sean says profit. That's exactly it. You're trying to run a profit. You've got this bottom line. And if you don't run a profit, you're not going to be successful as a corporation. If you have this profit focus, it means that you are looking primarily at values such as efficiency and effectiveness. Efficiency is essentially trying to do more with less, trying to create more output with fewer resources, with fewer inputs. The more efficient you can be, the more output you can create with fewer resources, obviously, the better your bottom line, the more profit you'll be able to generate. But you also have to be effective in the private sector, because if you're creating a product that nobody wants to buy and no one wants to use, you're not going to have the sales you need in order to provide that profit for you. So you got to be efficient and you also have to be effective. And those are two of the overriding values in the private sector. Efficiency and effectiveness are also hopefully values that underpin public organizations as well. However, sometimes our focus on efficiency is not quite as strong as the focus in the private sector. And one of the reasons why we sometimes don't focus as much on efficiency in the public sector is because of where our revenue, where our resources come from. If you're in a private sector corporation, your resources are going to come from your profits. And so if you are not generating a profit, you won't have resources to continue your business operations. In the public sector, most public organizations don't generate their revenue from profits, but rather they generate their revenue through appropriations, that are provided to them by a legislative body. Those appropriations tend to be much more stable, and you can count on them more year after year after year, as compared to profits that can be very much dynamic and you can change a lot from year to year. So when you have this ready-made source of revenue, of resources, efficiency is not always that important of a factor for you as it would be over in the private sector. When you think about the effectiveness type of value, yes, we hope that we are effective in the public sector. We spend a lot of time and a lot of money measuring the effectiveness of our policies and our programs. And we have an entire course in this program that is dedicated to program evaluation, to look at the effectiveness of programs and how well we're achieving our goals and our objectives. But when we're looking at effectiveness, it's a little bit different than we do in the private sector, because again, in the private sector, if your clients don't like the product that you are providing to them, they will go to another producer. They will find another corporation whose products they like more. However, in government, we oftentimes see a monopoly whereby government, you really have to take those government services. They're not being provided by the private sector. The private sector, through market failure, has failed to provide these goods and services, and so it's left to a government organization. So when you're kind of the only game in town, maybe effectiveness sometimes may not be quite as important as it might be over in the private sector. But here in the public sector, we also have additional values that are more important to us sometimes than what you might see in a private corporation. So some of the other values that underpin public administration are things such as social equity. Social equity is one of the primary values of public administration, especially in modern day public administration. There's a very famous theorist by the name of George Frederickson, George Frederickson, who is known for what's referred to as the new public administration. And that new public administration is very much based upon trying to enhance and trying to foster social equity and social justice. You read that Bennington and Moore article in the classics text, and they talk a lot about the idea of public value and that public managers have a responsibility for producing something of value because they are serving the citizens. And so if they are displacing private sector resources, then they need to make sure that the value that they are providing is greater than what you would get from those private sector resources. Things such as political responsiveness. We need to be responsive to elected officials, that oversight function with Congress. So we need to be responsive to requests from both the legislative as well as the executive branches. Things such as representative bureaucracy. We are very concerned about maintaining a representative bureaucracy, a bureaucracy that represents the population, the public that it serves. And that's another important value for us. The protection of individual rights. As we talked about last week under qualified good faith immunity, we are expected as public administrators to know and then endeavor not to violate the constitutional rights of people we come into contact with. So because of these additional values, it means we're going to probably have higher ethical standards in the public sector than what we might see in a private sector corporation. That ethical upgrade, that higher level of ethics in a public organization can be a challenge for us recruiting people to work in those public organizations. We really have to strike a balance between hiring the most skilled administrators, but still adhering to ethical principles to make sure the public interest is still being preserved. So it is difficult when you have higher ethical standards sometimes to attract people into the public sector, but hopefully the people that you are attracting really have this public service ethos. They really do believe in public service, and they really do believe that they are doing what they do in order to make a difference in the lives of citizens. And so when you have folks like that who have those types of characteristics, that's how you can enhance ethical adherence. We know that in public service, the quality of government is going to depend upon the quality of those who work in government and respect bureaucratic accountability and ethical behavior. So we need quality, skilled employees who also respect the fact that they need to operate in an ethical manner because they are working with public resources. Something George H.W. Bush referred to government service as being the highest and noblest calling. You know, Barack Obama in his 2008 campaign said that one of his goals of his administration would be to make government and public service cool again. I don't know how cool he made public service throughout his years. He tried, but we kind of see this ping pong effect. So we see the Obama administration really putting a value on public service. We see the Trump administration then talking about the deep state and talking about sometimes replacing public administrators, career administrators with more political appointees. Now, in the Biden administration, we see kind of flipping back to the Obama approach to public service. But public administration and public service is complex. There are a lot of moving parts in the public sector. We don't always just deliver services, direct services to citizens. Sometimes we're engaged in what's called indirect administration as well, where we are not interfacing directly with the citizens, but rather we are managing the resources and making the resources possible for that interaction to occur by another agency. So there's a lot of complexity going on in the public service, but it's important that we get people into the public service who really do believe in public service and really do believe in the public interest. So back in the 1930s, John Gause, in addition to criticizing the politics administration dichotomy of Woodrow Wilson, he was also one of the first ones to call for a separate professional organization for public administrators. And what grew out of that was this American Society for Public Administration. This is the professional organization for public administrators. Now, the issue in the public sector is that, yes, we are all public administrators. But in addition to being public administrators, we are probably also engineers, human resource specialists, human resource managers, budget analysts, finance managers. So we come from a variety of other professional backgrounds as well. Each one of those professions may have its own code of conduct that we need to adhere to, overlaid on top of the ASPA code of conduct. Now, hopefully, those codes of conduct will overlap with each other pretty well, and they will support each other and complement each other. So the ASPA code of conduct has kind of been kept kind of vague, kind of general in nature, so that we can accommodate all these other expectations that come from the other professions that public administrators are part of. But the current ASPA code of conduct that you see there on the screen consists of 8 different general principles that we expect everyone to adhere to as a public administrator. So just to go through these 8, because this will form the basis for your next Canvas essay. The first principle in the ASPA code of conduct is public interest. To promote the interests of the public and put service to the public above service to oneself. So you're there for the public interest as opposed to your own private interest. George Washington Plunkett, when he went out there and bought that property, used that non-public information to buy that property and then sell it back to the city at a greatly inflated value. That was not for the public interest, that was for his own private interest. So we try to put the public interest above our own private interests. Number 2 principle, to uphold the Constitution and the law. So this is what we were talking about the Constitution last week for. To respect and support government constitutions and laws while seeking to improve laws and policies to promote the public good. So you need to have a working familiarity with the federal Constitution, our state Constitution, and then again, endeavor not to violate those principles of freedom and civil liberties that are incorporated within those constitutions. At the same time, working to try and find ways to improve our laws and policies in order to promote the societal, the public good. So last week really was all about helping us achieve the second principle in the ASPA Code of Conduct. Third principle, promote democratic participation. Inform the public and encourage active engagement in governance. Be open, transparent, and responsive, and respect and assist all persons in their dealings with public organizations. So be as open and transparent as possible. Try and foster more public engagement. Again, this is kind of that multiple crack theory of Morton Grodson's, that people have the ability through social contract theory to participate in their own self-governance and their own self-determination. This third principle is why in a couple seconds, we'll talk about things in California such as the Public Records Act, things such as the Brown Act, things such as conflict of interest requirements. And California really does work very hard to try and promote democratic participation and to make sure that the public are aware of what administrators are doing. Your fourth principle, to strengthen social equity, as it says, social equity is one of the bedrock principles of what's called the new public administration. Treat all persons with fairness, justice, and equality, and respect individual differences, rights, and freedoms. Promote affirmative action and other initiatives to reduce unfairness, injustice, and inequality in society. Social equity really has become one of the top values, if you will, under public administration. The fifth principle is to fully inform and advise. And remember, we have to be politically responsive as administrators. So we need to provide accurate, honest, comprehensive, and timely information and advice to elected and appointed officials and governing board members and to staff members in the organization. So we sometimes have an issue as public administrators that's known as this principal agent type of relationship. The principal agent relationship says that there is a principal. That principal is oftentimes seen as a legislative body such as Congress or a state legislature. The agent is a public agency. The principal has the responsibility of overseeing the actions of the agency. In order to oversee the actions of an agency, the principal needs to have information. The problem in the principal agent relationship is that there is a great deal of information asymmetry in that the agency knows what it's doing on a daily basis. The principal sometimes does not have direct access to that information. So it then becomes incumbent on the agency to then openly provide that information to the principal so that the principal can conduct its constitutional oversight duties. The problem with that is this problem in principal agent theory known as a moral hazard. And the moral hazard of the principal agent relationship is that if agencies provide all this information to the principal, it then makes it easier for the principal to oversee the actions of the administrators and to hold those administrators accountable for their actions. So there's kind of a disincentive for administrators to provide this information because providing the information is going to make their life a lot more difficult and you'll have a whole lot more stringent oversight. So the moral hazard is there is kind of this incentive to keep this information to yourself rather than fully informing and advising the organizations that are intended to oversee your actions. This is a moral hazard that agencies under this fifth principle must overcome because we are required to fully inform, advise, provide accurate, honest, comprehensive, and timely information to elected and appointed officials so that they can have the information they need to then oversee the actions of an agent. There's nothing more frustrating for a principal than to have information withheld from them in trying to make a decision. I served 6 years on a governing board, and there were some instances where I didn't have the information I needed to make a decision because that information was being withheld by the quote unquote agents in that district. Sixth principle is to demonstrate personal integrity, adhere to the highest standards of conduct to inspire public confidence and trust in public service. This is something that is kind of woefully lacking these days is trust in public service and trust in government. By demonstrating personal integrity, you can again try to rebuild some of that trust among the public. Number 7 principle, to promote ethical organizations, strive to attain the highest standards of ethics, stewardship, and public service in organizations that serve the public. It's not just us as administrators adhering to these higher ethical standards, but we must push our organizations to achieve those higher ethical standards as well. So that may mean revising codes of ethic and codes of conduct. That may mean blowing the whistle if necessary within our organization whenever ethical violations become apparent. And then principle number 8, advancing the professional excellence, strengthen personal capabilities to act competently and ethically and encourage the professional development of others. This is something that is sometimes difficult for some public administrators, to encourage the professional development of others. We have to think a lot about succession planning. We have to think about the future of the organization after we have retired and moved on to wherever we're moving after retirement. We have an obligation to make sure that the information that we have is shared with others in the organization, that we can foster the professional development of newer employees in the organization so that they are prepared to step into these leadership roles whenever the time comes. We have been talking now for probably well over a decade about this retirement bubble, especially in the federal bureaucracy, that we have all of these employees who are getting ready to retire. And then when that bubble bursts and you have 30% of your workforce that retires within a 5-year period of time, how do you replace those positions? Where do you go to get that institutional memory and that knowledge that has been lost to these people who are retiring? Now, that bubble has not burst yet. Again, after a decade and a half, that bubble is still kind of there. It's kind of a little bit of air has been taken out of that bubble with people retiring along the way, but we still have a large number of employees. Baby boomers still make up about a third of the entire federal workforce, that they're going to be retiring in the very near future. So it's important that that information gets passed on to people who will be replacing them. Those are the basic 8 principles in the ASPA Code of Conduct. And so what you'll be doing in your Canvas essay is, after reviewing these 8 principles, think about your organization, think about you and what you do on a daily basis, and pull out and identify 3 of these principles that you think might be the most difficult ones to implement, either as an individual or as part of your organization. And so of these 8, which 3 do you think would be the most challenging to try and implement? Oops. Get my slide to move here. So, as we said on our last slide, principle number 5 says we have to fully inform and advise. Principle number 3 says we have to promote democratic participation. So that means we have to be as transparent as we possibly can be in doing our jobs in the public sector. We live in a state here in California that takes transparency very, very seriously. And there are a lot of other pieces of legislation beyond what I just have on the screen here, but just some basic examples of how we try and promote ethical adherence through transparency in California. One example is the very famous Brown Act. If you work with a city council, you know all about the Brown Act probably. The Brown Act requires that if you have an elected board or a governing board, a city council, county commissioners or supervisors, school board, if you have these boards, they must conduct their business in public if that meeting is made up of a majority of members. So if you have 5 members on your city council, 3 of those members are meeting, that's a majority. That meeting must then be conducted in public. In those public meetings, you also have to provide reasonable opportunity for members of the public to make comments and to participate in those meetings. That's why in most of these meetings, you'll have a public comment period. Now, the Brown Act also says that these governing boards and these city councils can place reasonable limitations on the amount of time devoted to public comments. And so what you'll oftentimes see is you'll see boards and city councils that will adopt something like a 20-minute limitation on public comments per topic. And so each speaker might get 2 minutes or might get 3 minutes to speak. that is considered under the law to be a reasonable expectation. And so governing boards and city councils can apply those reasonable types of limitations. Now, not everything that the city council or the governing board discusses is always done in open session. There is a provision in the Brown Act for closed session or executive session. But under the Brown Act, in order to go into an executive or closed session, you must do that out of an open session. So if you're going to talk about confidential personnel items in closed session, you must first start an open session and then recess into a closed session from that open session. You also have to provide the possibility that people can speak to items that are on that closed session agenda. Closed sessions, you're usually dealing with things such as personnel issues. And so if there's some discipline for personnel, that will be handled, at least discussed in closed session because of privacy rights. If you have conversations about existing or anticipated litigation against your city and you're having conversations with your legal counsel, those conversations can occur in closed session. Conversations that have to do with public safety. So if you are going to increase the safety procedures in your schools as a school district, for instance, those types of very sensitive discussions can be done in closed session because you don't want an open session tell people the vulnerabilities that they can then exploit in your school facilities. And so there are some limited things that can be done in closed session, but you can only talk about those limited items within closed. Everything else gets done in open session. There's an agenda requirement in the Brown Act that agendas must normally be published at least 72 hours in advance. Once that agenda is published, then in the meeting, you cannot discuss items that are not on that published agenda because people need to have a fair warning of what items and issues are going to be discussed in that open session. And there is a lot more with the Brown Act, but the Brown Act is there to try and ensure that type of openness and transparency in our decision making. Then we also have a Public Records Act here in California. So any member of the public can request public records from a governmental organization. That governmental organization then has 10 days to respond to that public records request. If any of you deal with public records requests in your daily job, you might know that public records requests will take up a great deal of time for any public agency because you have to go and find all the information, all the communication that deals with this topic that is the subject of that public records request. That not only includes the written documentation of the city, but it includes communications between staff and members of the city council. That if you have emails that are responsive to this request, those emails have to be disclosed as well. If you have text messages that are responsive to that request, those text messages need to be disclosed as well. And there's a case called the San Jose case here in California that says even if you have text messages on a personal cellular device and it is responsive to this public records request, those text messages also are discoverable and need to be disclosed. Again, for the purpose of openness and transparency. And then here in California, we also identify certain positions to be what we call reportable positions. In those reportable positions, those incumbents will have to file a conflict of interest form, otherwise known as Form 700. In that conflict of interest form, you have to report any potential conflicts of interest you may have with some of the or any of the topics or any of the discussions or decisions made by the city council or the governing board that you serve on. As a member of a school board, I had to fill out a Form 700 every year. In that Form 700, you have to disclose if you own property, as long as it's not property that your primary residence. Your primary residence does not have to be disclosed. But any other property you own, any investment property or anything at all within your jurisdiction, you have to disclose the value of that property. Any income that you are earning from any employers within your jurisdiction, that information also needs to be disclosed on that conflict of interest form. Again, done for the purpose of transparency and accountability, so that if there is a potential conflict of interest, the public are aware of what that potential conflict of interest is, so that if that member of the city council does not recuse themselves when that topic comes up, the public will know this is a conflict of interest. This is something that person should have recused themselves from the decision-making for. California tends to have more of these types of transparency and openness requirements than a lot of states around the country. We're very much what's referred to as a sunshine state, in that we open up the doors of decision making and we allow the sun to shine in and we allow the public to have access to what elected officials and administrators are doing. So in our last 5 minutes, just to wrap this up very quickly, accountability in the public sector really does require striking this balance. We have to strike this balance between external rules and laws and the internal training and character of our public servants. We also have to strike that balance between holding people accountable for their actions and providing them with the opportunity to take some risks, be innovative, and make good, difficult decisions, so that people do not fear that if they make an innovative, creative decision and it doesn't work out, that they're going to get in trouble for making that decision. So we have to try and find that balance. And that balance is, again, trying to balance ethical adherence with the value of effectiveness. Because if you can't find that balance, you're not going to be able to meet the demands of the public. Too many accountability standards and too many accountability regulations will inhibit the ability to be effective as an administrator and as a public organization. Now, this is just a very quick 1-hour overview of ethics and accountability in the public sector, in the public service. You are going to return to this topic again and again as you move throughout the program. You'll get it in budgeting, you'll get it in HR, you'll get it in org theory, you'll get it in policy analysis, you'll get it in program evaluation, and you also will get it in some of your elective courses as well. So if you take the 571 leadership class, there's a module on ethics of leadership. If you take the 575 employee-employer relations class, you'll talk a lot about avoiding unfair labor practices, about good faith bargaining, all for the purposes of ethical behavior and ethical interactions. Some is intergovernmental relations, even in that 535 class. We will talk a little bit about ethics in terms of the relationship between different levels of government and ethical or unethical practices that the federal government will engage with the state government on. So if you're using a mandate at the federal level, that is something that is not provided for in the Constitution. We'll talk about that from an ethical type of perspective. And so not only in your core courses, but also in your elective courses, you'll talk about ethics. When you get to 697 and you do your case studies, there will be ethical components in those case studies as well. Typically in the HR 577 case study, there are some ethical components there. In 660 organization theory, every 3 or 4 years, we use a case study called something like promoting ethical organizations. And so the entire case study is designed around how to promote an ethical organization. So this ethics topic is just being presented to you in an introductory way tonight, and then you'll cover it more in depth as you go throughout the rest of the MPA program. So that's our lecture, if you will, on ethics and accountability. Any questions? Okay, I see that there is a question here. Let's see. Okay, when you do Canvas essay number 2, you do not have to identify your organization. You don't have to identify your position. I know that whenever you're talking about ethical standards and being held accountable to certain ethical standards, it kind of gets to be a little touchy when you're talking about identifying organizations. So you do not have to identify the organization. You can talk a little bit more generally if you would want to, because I really don't want you to feel uncomfortable in terms of identifying your specific organization. So you can if you're comfortable doing it. If not, you can then be much more general in the way in which you respond to that prompt. Again, for that one, you're just picking 3 of these 8 principles that we discussed earlier here, the ASPA principles in the code of conduct, and then discussing which of the 3 you think could be the most difficult for your organization or for you, or for a public organization more generally. Also do remember, in addition to that, you then also have your draft advancement to candidacy form that is due next week as well. Just to reiterate, if you are not in the MPA program, if you're in the MPH program or any other non-MPA program, you do not have to do the draft advancement to candidacy form because you probably have already advanced in your program. Just send me a quick email and tell me I'm in the MPH program, and so therefore I've already advanced candidacy, and then I'll go ahead and waive that assignment for you. But if you're in the MPA program, you will need to submit that draft advancement form. I will then look at your course sequencing and provide you some feedback so that once you're done with your first 6 units in the program, you'll be ready to roll and going and formally advancing to candidacy. So next week, Canvas lesson number 2, and then your draft advancement to candidacy form. Anything else? Any other questions in our last minute together? If not, then I'll have this reporting up on our Canvas site no later than tomorrow morning. Try and stay dry and be very safe this week. Hopefully the rain will pass on in another day or two. And then we'll be back at it again next Monday. Next Monday, when we get together again, we will talk more about public-private sector differences. And then if time permits, which I think it probably will, we'll then work ahead a little bit and start talking about public administration as a discipline as well. So public-private differences, and then a little bit on the discipline of public administration for next week. Okay. Thanks, everyone. Have a great week, and I'll talk to you again next Monday afternoon. So take care.